Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. On behalf of the National Transit Institute, I welcome you and thank you so much for participating today. The National Transit Institute develops, promotes, and delivers training and education programs for the public transit industry in the United States. Today's webinar is National Transit Database 2022 Safety and Security Rail Mode Reporting. And we are very pleased to have as our presenters today, Ann Singleton and James Overbeek, and Ann Eichelberg will be facilitating our Q&A box. Ann Singleton has been a senior safety and security analyst for the NTD program since 2009 and serves as the safety team lead. Previously, Ann was involved in several FTA initiatives and programs in a variety of support and analytical roles. Prior to Ann's work with FTA, she was a software instructor and database developer. James Overbeek joined the NTD team in 2015. He is a graduate of Randolph-Macon College and currently works as a validation analyst for the safety and security module of the National Transit Database. And Ann Eichelberg is also a safety and security analyst for the NTD program and also supports several other programs for the FTA's Office of Transit Safety and Oversight. And prior to working for FTA, Ann was a technical assistant with a rail safety engineering firm. During today's presentation, you can ask a question at any time by typing it in the Q&A box. If you do not see the box, you can enable it by clicking on the Q&A box on the Zoom controls, which are most likely at the bottom of your screen. If you have not already printed out a copy of the presentation that was emailed to you, I will be pasting the link in the chat box in just a bit. At this time, I will turn it over to Ann Singleton. Ann.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to join us. The goal of today's session is to familiarize NTD reporters with the safety and security reporting requirements and the individual reporting forms. As always, we hope that the knowledge you gain today will make your job easier, and we sincerely appreciate your commitment to safety and security reporting. For those of you that report for purchase transportation providers as well, please feel free to share this presentation with them so that they too are aware of your reporting requirements to NTD. So today we're going to show you how to access the NTD system and navigate through the various menus and forms. We'll discuss how setup is achieved and safety package navigation features. We're going to go through each one of the four safety and security reporting forms, especially going through a typical collision report, which is the longest one. And we'll also be discussing some changes that have been made for 2022. So as Cylindria mentioned, James and I are your instructors today, and then Ann Eichelberger is backing us up on the Q&A box to give us a hand there. Your NTD Program Manager, Thomas Coleman, and the NTD Operations Center Manager, Joseph Eldridge, are not going to be participating in today's session, but of course you can contact any of us at any time. If you do not know who your safety analyst is, again, you can contact any one of me, James, or Ann, and we'll let you know who your analyst is. We'll also show you ways in just a moment in the system to where your safety analyst is listed. Okay, so I just did a little kickoff here. I'm going to turn this over to James now to get us started, and I'll be talking to you again in a few minutes.
Thank you, Ann. As Ann mentioned, first we'll have a brief overview of the NTD program. Then we will discuss the website and show you how to navigate the system. In 1974, Congress established the National Transit Database Program as a means to collect information and statistics on transit systems in the United States. The first data was collected in 1979 via paper reports. Since then, the NTD has evolved into the nation's primary source of information and statistics on transit systems. The data you report to the NTD is very important and is used in a variety of ways. These include publicly available data products, which can be used for peer review. The industry performance reports to Congress and other federal agencies or departments, the formulation of national policy to direct, support, or improve other FTA program initiatives, and is used to factor federal funding allocations to transit agencies. How do we validate your data? SNS 40 forms are read by the analyst to compare the event description against data points. In addition, all forms are periodically run through various system validation programs looking for common issues. If the analyst has questions or requests corrections, the analyst typically returns the form to the agency, but may also call or email the reporters. Once corrections are made, the analyst reviews the forms and will approve the submission if applicable. When you make changes to a report, please be sure to always submit the form. Failure to report required data can have severe consequences and could affect the agency's annual program funding. A failure to report can be submitted by an analyst to FTA for a variety of reasons, as you see listed here. Please remember to submit timely reports and respond to analyst inquiries in a timely manner. This is a screenshot of the National Transit Database homepage on the Federal Transit Administration website. On the left are several links indicated by the red arrows that we will discuss on the coming slides. The first of these links is the About the NTD section, which contains an overview of the NTD program, contact information, and help desk contact information. The NTD Data section provides access to published data products, including the safety and security time series files, current annual data and profiles, monthly ridership statistics, and the National Transit Summaries and Trends, NTST, just to name a few. Under reference materials, you will find the NTD glossary, policy manuals, quick reference guides, information on training and conferences, and more. The CY 2022 quick reference guides will be posted shortly, but are not available at this time. Click on NTD on either the NTD reporting tool or reporting login to log into the NTD program. Use your business email address in all lowercase letters to log in. Users can change the password as often as they like, but the system requires a new password every 60 days. Please, as a reminder, external users must log in using login.gov. The agency's user manager establishes a person's role in the system. The user manager is also the point of contact if you need to have your user role changed. A person must be uniquely identified in only one role. There are several access levels for NTD reporting and safety and security data reporting, as shown here for your review. It is very important to contact your safety analyst whenever there is a change in the reporter. This way we can contact the new person and ensure they have received training and update our external contact list. To log in from the NTD homepage, click on the NTD reporting tool. The first screen that appears is shown here on the left. Once you click on agree to the disclaimer, boxes for you to enter your username and password are presented. However, you will see that there is the third link on the bottom, which you will need to click to log in using login.gov. The first screen will appear similar to this screenshot. However, you may have different options based on the sites you have access to. On this screen, you can bookmark NTD by clicking on the star. Once bookmarked, this screen will only appear if there's a system notice, which you must acknowledge. Once you complete the login, this is a snapshot of the default home screen. Notice the menu options in the blue bar across the top, which we discuss more on the next slide. Beneath the FTA logo, you see you have access to the different modules in NTD, annual, monthly, safety, and profile. The task menu shows you how many tasks are in your queue. For example, one of the tasks you may have could be to manage any pending or incomplete SNS reports. The Reports tab will display reports that are available to you. First, click on the category, in this case, safety. There are two reports you may find helpful here. One is the historical lookup report to view safety and security data reported in prior years. Another report is the rate compared to industry rate report, which will compute and compare your agency incident, injury, and fatality rates against the industry average per 10 million unlinked passenger trips. Under the action menu item, there are no actions related to safety data reporting, but you may see actions depending upon your user role. The grid in the upper corner provides internal access to other sites such other FTA organizations, the user management module, the SSOR for state safety oversight data, and so on. The silhouette is where you log out and you can access your Appian profile and system settings. Now we will review safety and security setup and navigation. Safety and security packages are automatically generated at the beginning of a new calendar year based on the agency's previous reporting status. Modes and types of service available in the safety module are determined by the agency's P20 form. Reporting starts based on the mode's commitment date on that P20 form. If you see any unexpected changes to the modes or type of service, or have any questions about the modes or types of service you see, contact the person in your agency who submits the annual reporting data. Please do not attempt to modify the P20 profile, as changes made here can affect all aspects of reporting and may cause data to be deleted. The safety packages give you access to all safety and security reporting forms. Here's a list of all of the safety forms. We'll go through all of the forms in detail. As I mentioned, from the Home tab, click on the Safety module to view the available safety packages by year. Right now, we still have, well, we had 3 years open, but 2020 just closed. To open a package, click on the blue folder and the agency ID on the left. The next screen to appear is the summary view or landing page. If you want to bypass the landing page and go directly to the dashboard where you can access reports, click on the pencil on the right side instead. However, this has an issue right now, but should be corrected soon. This is a screenshot of the safety summary viewer landing page. At the top, you see a reporting year, your agency ID number and name. Beneath that is your safety analyst name and email address, and the safety and security reporting start and end dates, which is the current calendar year. Below that, you see 3 table filtering boxes, the form name, filter box used to limit which forms you see in the form table below, the form status filter to view forms by status such as returned or approved, and the mode type of service filter to only filter a specific mode. You may use as many filters as needed. Below the filters is the form table. You can sort by any of the columns by clicking on the column heading. A double click to the column heading will reverse sort. You can also use the web browser's find feature by doing Control F and enter the number of the major report you want to locate. However, you must be on the right page to find it. Remember, you cannot open any of these forms on this safety summary view. To access the form, you must click on the NTD Safety Forms button located in the upper right corner of the screen. When you click on the NTD Safety Forms button, the dashboard is displayed. It looks very similar to the safety summary view, but here you can open existing forms and create major event forms by clicking on the File, New SNS 40 button. We do apologize as the screenshot does not show the File, New SNS 40 button, but it will be located above the form name drop-down box right here. To open an existing form, click the blue form name and number link in the first column. The form table can be sorted and filtered just as we discussed on the previous safety summary view. We have several form changes and clarifications for 2022. First, to the SNS 30 security configuration form, we added a number of secondary security personnel field to align with the primary and secondary personnel type columns. Also, the existing total number of security personnel field will now automatically calculate the primary plus the secondary values. The threshold question on setup screen 2, which reads, was the event a collision at a grade crossing, was changed to, was this event a collision at a grade crossing or intersection? This is to support the new field we will see on the next slide. We will discuss this further later in the presentation. We added a right-of-way intersection and service stop to the list of locations on the rail collision event information form. To support these selections, we added a selection of intersection control and service stop control device options on to the right-of-way configuration section on the rail collision information form. The appropriate control device options list will appear based on the location you selected. We made a clarification that the definition of rail transit vehicle does include large rolling stock, such as a flat car, as long as it is not hand-powered. Therefore, a collision between a flat car and a revenue train or a work train, for example, would meet the automatically reportable rail-to-rail threshold. Also, we added the word moving to the runaway train criteria. The term runaway implies a train that is moving, but it is now clearly indicated in the manual. We have also made some clarifications for derailments. Derailments include situations where the wheel or wheels leave and return to the rail and excludes hand-powered rail equipment. Again, these were implied before, but are now clearly included in the manual. That concludes the navigation. So we'll move on to the SNS 20 Safety and Security CEO form. The SNS 20 CEO certification form is the CEO's confirmation of the accuracy of the safety and security data for the previous calendar year. The form becomes available on January 15th in the previous year's safety package. The form automatically calculates data from submitted reports for the year. Unsubmitted data or open reports are not included. The form is due by the end of February of the following, and only a person logged in as the CEO or CEO delegate can submit the form. Late notices are sent to the CEO. If this form has not been submitted for CY 2021, please remind the CEO to submit as quickly as possible. Data reporters should review their data to ensure it matches to the data in the SNS 20. Agencies should also use any in-house reports available to help verify the data. Also, the historical lookup report on the reports tab may be helpful as it shows incident counts by month. If the data does not match, check to ensure that all safety reports are submitted. As mentioned before, unsubmitted data will not be included. You may add or delete SNS 40s or edit SNS 50 data, and the SNS 20 will automatically recalculate the numbers. Remember to always notify your safety analyst if you delete any data. You or your CEO will check the confirm checkboxes adjacent to each data point. Then the CEO can click on submit. Once the form is submitted, it cannot be resubmitted, but the form auto calculates each time it is opened. This is a snapshot of the 2020 SNS 20 CEO certification form, but the 2021 form is identical. Please notice that the CEO name and title show. This is a screenshot of our test database, so we do not show actual data reported by any agency. This will conclude the SNS 20 data. I'm going to now talk about the SNS 30. The SNS 30 security configuration form collects the number and type of security personnel employed or contracted by your agency. The form is completed once at the beginning of the calendar year, and you are not required to update this form during the year. All SNS 30s must be completed and submitted to enable reporting. If you cannot create or edit an SNS 40 or 50, it may be because one or more SNS 30s is not submitted. All SNS 30 forms should be completed by the end of February, even if you do not submit SNS 50 reports, Commuter Rail and Alaska Rail. Those of you that have completed the SNS 30s will notice you have the usual box to enter the number of primary security personnel and a new box to enter the number of secondary security personnel. The total number of security personnel now calculates the figures from the primary and secondary boxes. Below the boxes are 7 selections for identifying the primary and secondary personnel types. The primary security force is the one that routinely responds to events and/or is assigned to patrol agency property. The secondary security force is the one or ones that occasionally respond when the primary force requires assistance. Please use a count of 0 for the use of local police non-contracted selection. The number of personnel is reported in full-time equivalent hours. So 1 FTE equals 1 person working a 40-hour week or 2,080 hours per year. You may prorate the number of personnel if the person works only part-time providing transit security, or they provide security for more than one mode. One SNS 30 is completed for each mode. Be careful not to double count personnel. The value in the total number of security personnel from each SNS 30 form should equal the total number of agency security personnel. For example, the demand response directly operated mode, the total number is 0.5. NBPT mode, the total number is 1.5. And for the LRDO mode, the total number is 3. This means that the total security force for the entire agency would be the 3 modes combined, or 5 FTE. If your security force covers multiple modes, you may use any reasonable method for determining FTEs. That may be modal ridership or the number of employees covering a mode. If an agency contracts for security and pays a monthly fee based on services used, they should determine FTEs based on the previous year's total hours worked. NTD allows for only one primary personnel type. If your agency has more than one type of security personnel, it considers its primary. Report the security force with the largest number of personnel as the primary and the smaller force as secondary. For further information on the SNS 30, please see the SNS policy manual on the NTD website or ask your analyst for assistance. Now we'll look at the non-major reporting of SNS 50. The definition of a reportable event is a safety event occurring on transit right-of-way or infrastructure, at a transit revenue facility, at a maintenance facility, during a transit-related maintenance activity, or involving a transit revenue vehicle. These safety events must meet the single injury only threshold and are related to falls, electric shock, smoke, etc. If the safety event results in multiple injuries, the event is bumped up to a major report. The SNS 50 form also collects the number of non-major fires where there was no evacuation, injuries, fatalities, or property damage, but that still required suppression. Commuter rail modes, certain YR modes, and the Alaska Railroad do not report on the SNS 50 form. There are some exclusions to the non-major events, including events that occur off transit property, where affected persons, vehicles, or objects come to rest on transit property after the event. For example, this might be where a bicyclist wheels stuck in the embedded tracks and a person lands on the tracks. It also excludes OSHA events occurring in administrative buildings. Transport of an individual solely for mental health evaluation unrelated to a specific event due to a person stating they want to harm themselves where there's no evident injury, those transported solely for intoxication or drug overdose, and finally, injuries from collisions, even what you may call a minor collision or any other reportable major events. To recap, for submitting other safety incidents, you are entering the number of incidents and the matching number of injured parties. Remember that injured means they were transported away from the scene for medical attention, regardless of whether they appear injured or not. Do not include people who were not transported away from the scene for medical attention, or those transported only for intoxication where there is no injury. Below you will see a list of several examples of injuries reported on the SNS 50. Here's a snapshot of the SNS 50 monthly summary report form. The number of events in this column should add up to the number of injuries in these three columns. Two of the categories for injuries on the SNS 50 form relate to securement issues. Securement issues are those related to an injury resulting from improper securement of a mobility device, such as a wheelchair or scooter. So they are reported as other in-vehicle securement issue. The other category is for other in-vehicle, not a securement issue. These are trips, slips while on the vehicle, or for being thrown from a seat during a vehicle maneuver. Complete and submit one form for each mode and type of service monthly. If no qualifying safety events occurred for the month and mode, open the appropriate SNS 50 form and choose the checkbox adjacent to no data to report, then save and submit. The SNS 50 is completed regardless of any major event. The NTD system sends automatic late notices on the 1st and 5th of each month if your data has not been submitted. Please note that a report that has been saved but not submitted is considered late. If you get a late notice, please check to ensure all reports are submitted. If a form is still not submitted by the 15th of the month, a third late notice is sent by the analyst. If there are extenuating circumstances why you cannot report, please advise your safety analyst. Remember, do not include injuries due to collisions, security events, or other major types on the SNS 50. The SNS 30 and SNS 50 forms can be modified at any time. Some reporters like to enter events as they occur during the month. For these reporters, they can modify the form and save and close the form after each change. Your validation analyst reviews each report for accuracy. If we have any questions, we may return the report to you, call or email you with our concern. If the return feature is used, the user login listed under the last modified user column will receive the email. Editing SNS 40 forms will be reviewed at the end of that section. I will now pass this back to Ann.
Thank you, James. Okay, so now we're going to dive into SNS 40 major event reporting. Excuse me. Applicability is the same as it is for the SNS 50s, but let's look at it in a little bit more detail. A reportable event is a safety or security event occurring on the transit right-of-way or infrastructure, at a transit revenue facility, at a transit maintenance facility or rail yard, or during a transit-related maintenance activity, or involving a transit revenue vehicle that meets a reporting threshold. SNS 40 reports are due no later than 30 days of the date of the event. Please make every effort to report in a timely manner. The exclusions have not changed. Events that occur off transit property where persons, vehicles, or objects come to rest on transit property after the event is one exclusion. Continuing, OSHA events in administrative buildings, drug overdoses or natural causes, including those found deceased, maintenance vehicle or other non-revenue vehicle collisions that occur while traveling to or from the maintenance-related activity, or collisions involving a supervisor or transit police vehicle, for example, while operating on public roads. Let's review your thresholds. This is just a list, and then we'll go into more detail. So first, of course, there are fatalities, which includes suicides. One or more persons transported for medical attention, which is considered a non-serious injury or serious injury. Substantial property damage and evacuations of a transit vehicle or revenue facility for life safety reasons, or evacuations to the rail right-of-way, including both transit or officially directed customers and customer self-evacuations are also automatically reportable. Customer self-evacuations is not automatically reportable. I'll make that clearer. It's a checkbox, but it's not a threshold. All derailments on both main line or in the yard are reportable. A collision involving a rail transit vehicle at a grade crossing or intersection. The grade crossing definition used to include a statement for street running operations. Each intersection was considered a grade crossing, but as you'll see, the grade crossing and intersections have been separated into individual locations, though that does not affect the applicability. Again, we'll talk more about that in just a moment. A collision between a rail transit vehicle and a person, regardless of injury. A collision between a rail transit vehicle and another rail transit vehicle, which includes both revenue and non-revenue and maintenance vehicles. And any incident involving a runaway train. Runaway train does apply only to revenue vehicles, and it includes whether or not they were in service at the time. So here we have some examples of reportable events. One example would be a collision where the vehicle is deadheading or is out of service and involved in a collision that meets a threshold. Maintenance-related activities are included in reporting, and here you see a few examples of those maintenance-type related injuries or events. Less severe injuries to maintenance workers are captured on the SNS 50 forms, the monthly summary forms, along with non-major injuries to passengers and patrons. Here are a few examples of events that are not reportable to NTD. The first two listed are examples of events that occur off transit property, and also the last bullet referring to employees injured on a city street or other property that is not transit-owned property. NTD also collects non-transit collisions, such as an accident in a transit parking lot or with transit property. And here you see a couple of examples. Another example of a non-transit collision would be if a rail maintenance equipment collided with anything other than a train and the event meets a reporting threshold. Fatalities. A fatality is a death confirmed within 30 days of the date of the transit event. This includes transit-related suicides. Please do not include deaths resulting from illness, drug overdose, or natural causes, including those just found deceased on transit property, where it's not the result of a collision or a suicide. Injuries. As we've mentioned, there are two types of injuries. An injured person is a person that's transported away from the scene for medical attention, which is considered to be a non-serious injury. This includes transport by ambulance, transport by private vehicle, or any other mode of transport. An injury may be deemed serious, which does not require transport from the scene. Whenever you report a serious injury, please try and describe the nature of the injury in the event description to corroborate the serious nature that you're reporting. This really helps us validate these serious injuries and make sure that they are applicable. Someone knocked unconscious, for example, would meet the serious injury threshold, as that affects the brain. If an event is reportable, a 48-hour hold for mental health evaluation does not meet the serious injury criteria. Please note that injury thresholds are different between rail and non-rail modes. For non-rail modes, all injuries in this context would be considered non-serious. Okay, so here we just have a table to help you identify what constitutes a serious injury. We often get questions about how an agency can find out about hospitalization or severity of injury with, HIPAA regulations. Sometimes the agency will learn by persons or person's family that the injured party was admitted to the hospital, especially if there could be, litigation or claims by a person to the agency. If not, FTA expects only a reasonable effort to attain this information. Injury excludes first aid administered at the scene. Medical attention due to illnesses should not be reported. Also, the exclusions regarding mental health evaluations and declarations of self-harm, intoxication, and overdoses are excluded, just as James mentioned when covering the SNS 50 criteria. Next threshold we'll look at is substantial damage. You can see that substantial damage is defined as damage to any involved vehicles, facilities, equipment, rolling stock, or infrastructure that has disrupted the operations of the rail transit agency. That's the first part, has to disrupt operations. Second part is that it also adversely affects the strength, performance, or operating characteristics of the object or vehicle, requiring towing, rescue, on-site maintenance, or immediate removal prior to safe operation. We do have seasoned reporters that may remember the $25,000 threshold, such as we have for non-rail modes. But remember that dollar amounts are not a factor in determining substantial damage. To meet the substantial damage threshold, it must meet both parts of this criteria that you see here. Disrupts operations and affects the strength and so forth, as we just discussed. Substantial damage excludes damage to cracked windows and small dents and puncture holes, as you see in the first bullet point, and also personal property that might have been in the vehicle, such as a laptop, cell phone, or so on, cost of accident or criminal investigation, or medical claims and litigation. Substantial damage. Well, we first talked a moment ago about both inclusions and exclusions referring to on-site maintenance and removal from service. Most agencies have policies to remove vehicles from service for post-accident inspections or investigations. That's not necessarily removing it from service at the site. When applying the substantial damage threshold, consider, again, both parts of the substantial damage criteria, that it's damage, physical damage, and required maintenance or removal prior to safe operation. Exclusions from service for minor repairs or maintenance do not refer to damage in this context. Removal from service due to post-accident inspections may be a policy, but not necessarily due to damage. Continuing with the example of the exclusions from service for minor repairs, in a non-transit collision where a vehicle hits a catenary pole disrupting service. The repairs could be minor, but the disruption to service could be significant. Agencies would report substantial damage if the passenger vehicle or overhead catenary system is substantially damaged, per criteria, as a result of the event. Regarding towing, portion of the substantial damage criteria, this does not pertain to towing the train, but it does refer to the towing of the other vehicle due to disabling damage in order to meet the threshold. For example, there's a mid-block collision with no injuries, no fatalities, yet the car is towed due to disabling damage. You would select the substantial damage option on setup screen 2, and then when it asks you to identify what damage, you would choose to non-transit property only selection. Then on the other vehicle form, there's a follow-up confirmation question saying, was this vehicle towed from the scene due to disabling damage as a result of the collision? So you would click yes on that. So you'll see that when we get to that other vehicle form. A vehicle towed because the driver was transported for injuries or something similar to that, where it's not being towed for damage, would not meet the tow criteria for disabling damage. We do have some automatically reportable collisions. Rail transit vehicle collisions at a grade crossing or at a street intersection are automatically reportable regardless of any other threshold. This includes pedestrian crossings at stations and crosswalks at intersections, which we'll talk more about later. Note that there is an exclusion for the word intersection does not change the threshold. It's to support the new intersection location, as mentioned earlier, for street running mixed traffic operations. And again, we're going to cover it in more detail in just a moment. Another automatically reportable collision is a collision between a rail transit vehicle and a person, regardless of injury or fatality. For example, if a person walks into the side of a moving train and is not injured, you report the collision with the person, but you do not include an injury form. Rail transit vehicle includes rail maintenance vehicles. As a reminder, if a person bumps into a train that is not moving, it is not considered a collision, and it's reported as a slip and fall on the SNS 50 form. Rail-to-rail vehicle collisions are also automatically reporting, including any configuration of 2 or more revenue or non-revenue vehicles. Again, we reiterate that, for example, a collision between a flat car, and this should actually say flat cart, I think I'm on the right screen there, would meet the rail-to-rail, I'm sorry, getting ahead of myself, between a flat car and a train would meet the rail-to-rail collision threshold. Also, that hand-powered rolling stock are not considered vehicles, so this example would not be considered a rail-to-rail collision, but may still be reportable if it meets a threshold. The same would be true for a non-revenue vehicle colliding with a person or object. It would have to meet a threshold. So this table is designed to assist you in how to report a rail-to-rail collision, and if the event meets the automatically reportable threshold, and then the number and types of vehicles that you would include. When you create a rail collision report, the collision event form requires you to enter how many transit trains are involved and how many other vehicles are involved. In the last row, you see that when a work train or maintenance vehicle collides with an object or a person or rail equipment, just as we mentioned, the event is still reportable as a rail collision, but a threshold must be met, such as an injury or property damage. Agencies are required to also report all derailments, both mainline and those occurring in the yard, regardless of meeting any other threshold. This includes derailments of trains in revenue or non-revenue service and maintenance vehicles. Cases where a wheel or wheels leave the rail and returns to the rail aren't considered a derailment, and any derailment of a rail transit vehicle which is part of the consist being pushed or pulled by powered track equipment. The runaway train threshold, again, applies only to revenue trains running in or out of service and does not apply to work trains. It includes whether the train is manned or unmanned at the time that it runs away. Runaway train events may be reported as a collision, a derailment, or an other safety event accordingly. All evacuations for life safety or to the rail right-of-way are reportable, including those directed by transit officials, and we also include self-evacuations. An evacuation for life safety means that there's imminent danger to people in that environment. Self-evacuations are where customers vacate the property without the direction of the transit agency or other authority. Some examples of life safety reasons might be a suspicious package, bomb threats, bombings, smoke events, fire, fuel fumes or noxious odors, and so on. Evacuation may be due to mechanical or maintenance issues. For example, a train loses power and passengers are evacuated to the right-of-way. However, if passengers are moved from one train to another without stepping onto the right-of-way, or they're evacuated to a station platform, that's not considered an evacuation to the right-of-way. Not that it's not reportable, it's just not the right-of-way. All right, so generating these SNS 40 forms. Unlike your SNS 50, you have to tell it when you want to create a major event report by clicking on that File New SNS 40 button that is on the safety package. If you have an event that includes 2 or more transit modes from your agency, how do you choose which mode to report it under? If the event involved your rail mode and a non-rail mode, such as a streetcar and a bus, then you would choose the rail mode. And if you have, of course, any questions about other modal configurations, please feel to ask your safety analyst. All right, so when you create the new SNS 40 form, the first 2 screens act as a wizard to help you determine if the event meets a threshold. So the first screen, setup screen 1, captures the date of the event, the mode and type of service, and the event type. This is a snapshot of that screen. Okay, going into a little bit more detail. The first and most common event type on setup screen 1 is a collision. And this includes suicides or attempted suicides where there was vehicle impact. However, if a person is intentionally pushed in front of a train and is struck, this would be reported as an assault. Derailments are the next choice in the list, both mainline and yard derailments. Again, another little caveat, if the derailment is a result of a collision, then you would report you would report the event as a collision. The agency would also report fires, hazardous material spills, acts of God, and other safety events that rounds out the list of events that you see on setup screen 1. Your security events I'm sorry, I skipped that. Your security events are also on screen 1, but there are 2 separate types of security events. There are system security events such as arson, bomb threats, bombings, burglaries, suspicious packages, and so on. And basically, these are events that affect the transit system itself. Then there's also personal security events such as assault, robbery, homicide, suicide, etc., that affect one or more persons. Just as with the other event types, the event must meet a reporting threshold. Suicides or attempted suicides, as I mentioned a moment ago, attempted suicides and suicides that are a result of a collision are reported as a collision, but if that attempt or that suicide is not due to a collision, then it's reported on this personal security event form. Then you go to Setup Screen 2, and on Setup Screen 2, it asks you a series of questions to help determine reportability. The first is the number of injuries and or fatalities. Then the next question asks if there was substantial damage or not, and if you choose yes, then you get 3 choices of what the damage was to, basically transit property, non-transit property, or both. And then it also asks you if the event was included an evacuation for life safety or to the rail right-of-way. If you're reporting a collision, you will also be asked 4 other questions. The first would be, were transit vehicles involved in the collision? Was the event a collision at a grade crossing or intersection? Was the collision an event with another rail vehicle or a person? And did the event involve a runaway train? And this question, the runaway train question, also appears if you're reporting a derailment or an other safety event. So this is a screenshot of Setup Screen 2 for a collision. Regarding the question, were transit revenue vehicles or non-revenue rail transit vehicles involved in this collision, answering no to this question creates a non-transit collision report, which must meet a reporting threshold, as we talked about earlier. And there's some examples listed here that you see. One thing I want to kind of point out here, I have a typo I have to apologize for. The last bullet, that says a flat car collides with anything. We already talked about flat cars. This really, what I intended here was flat cart, but really that should probably say, excuse me for going back, for saying hand cart there. So I apologize for that if it's confusing anybody. If you've downloaded the presentation, you want to make a note about that little typo of mine there. That would be flat cart, or just cross it out entirely. All right, so if we were creating a non-transit collision, such as when a vehicle runs into catenary poles and it meets a reporting threshold, this is the screen that you would see. So you see you will see that this is a much shorter version of the collision forms. And so if you are reporting a collision and you see this screen and it involved a revenue vehicle, you're in the wrong form. So you want to just close that out and try again. Again, it would mean you accidentally clicked no to that question, were transit revenue or maintenance vehicles involved in the collision. Okay, back to Setup Screen 2. Based on the selections and questions that you answer, the system will respond accordingly. If the event is reportable as a major event, the basic information screen will be the next screen to appear. If the event is not reportable as a major event, the system will generate a message that lets you know that it's not reportable, or that perhaps it might be reportable on the SNS 50. So this gives you an opportunity to look at how you answered the questions again, and maybe you realize you clicked on something incorrectly, and you can make that change and then continue on. All right, so as I said, if the event's reportable and it's matching your criteria, the next screen to appear is the basic information screen. The basic information screen displays the date that you already selected. When entering the time on this form, be sure to use the AM and PM designations, even if you use a military or 24-hour clock format. I know it seems a little counterintuitive there, but that's the way the field is set up. So you still have to include AM and PM. For the approximate or actual location of the event, please be sure to include the full address, including the city and state. We are getting a little bit more particular about this. Sometimes we actually find events in different states. So if you can include the city and state, that would be most helpful in allowing us to determine that your coordinates are correct. The geographic location, as I just mentioned, the coordinates, latitude and longitude are also required. You're permitted to enter numbers, a decimal point, and a negative symbol for the longitude. Please use a minimum of 4 decimal places. You can do up to 7 decimal places, but you need at least 4. If you don't have the coordinates, you can use a variety of internet resources, whichever one is easiest for you to use. One of the sites that we often use for our validation efforts is just Google Maps. So this next screen, if you're not familiar with how to get lat and long out of Google Maps, after you type in the complete address over on the left-hand side, and you see the way this one does it, it cuts it down. It puts Charlottesville down here, even though I originally typed it in the box. But once it finds it, it moves it down here. But at any rate, it moves the city and state down there. Once it has found the location, then it's identified by that red pointer that you see right back there behind the coordinates that have come up. To make the coordinates appear, if you right-click on that darker part of the indicator, and it'll come up with all of these options that you see listed here. But there's your latitude and longitude. And if you click on the latitude and longitude there, it actually automatically copies it to your clipboard. So then you can take that and go back over to your basic information form and just paste them. Now it pastes both the lat and the long, but then you can edit it from there. And it just that way it ensures not typing in an incorrect digit. Basic information screen also captures the event description, which is the most important piece of information that you can give us. This tells us, or should tell us, everything that we need to know about the event. There's a 2,000 character limit. If you exceed the 2,000 character limit, it's going to come up with a message and tell you that you've exceeded the limit. However, it doesn't tell you by how much. So now you're just going to have to edit your description a little bit so it's not just cutting it off. The description should be concise but descriptive so that the analyst can understand what occurred, how it occurred, and it should include the number and type of injuries or fatalities and if any vehicle was towed. It's also quite helpful if you include information about, the damage to the train and the other vehicle. You may have noticed in the event description did not include any personal identifiable information such as names, addresses, badge numbers, driver's license IDs, and so on. You can include ages and genders, which is fine because that's on the form itself, but exclude this other personally identifiable information. On the basic information screen, there are also check boxes for attempted suicide and suicide. Please make sure that this selection is also made on your injury or fatality form accordingly, if applicable. And the last piece of information on the form on the basic information screen is the name and phone number of someone to contact for additional information regarding the event. You do not need to enter another name or person here, especially if it's the person entering in the report. 9 times out of 10, we're going to contact the person that submitted the report rather than anyone else. If you do put in a name and phone number there, when you type in the phone number, don't use any parentheses or dashes or dots. Just put in the numbers, because otherwise it's just going to format to numbers with the parentheses and so forth. It'll end up cutting off half of the phone number. All right, across the top of your screen on the basic information form, you will see a blue status bar. So that's telling you how far along you've gone and how many more forms you have to submit based on the questions you will be answered. This is a snapshot of the basic information screen, and here you can see that status bar here, and that'll just continue on as you go to answer fill out the various forms. All right, so first we are going to review the details of reporting a collision, since that's the most common event type. The collision screens will vary slightly depending on selections that you've made on setup screen 2. Typically, there are 4 screens, or 4 subforms, if you will, that may appear when you're reporting a transit collision. That would be the transit event information form, the collision event information form, I misspoke, collision event information. The second one is a collision information form. Next would be the transit vehicle involved form. And then if any other vehicles were involved in the collision, then you would also have an other vehicle form for each other vehicle that was involved in the collision. And this is a snapshot of the collision event information screen. First collision screen, again, is the collision event information screen. This form captures information about the number of transit trains involved, which should always be 1 unless there's 2 trains from your agency that collided. Several locations are listed and include Revenue Facility Transit Station, which is a building with a waiting room, ticket office, or machines, restrooms, or concessions, so on. A non-revenue facility, which would include your rail yard, your maintenance buildings, train wash site, and so forth. Right-of-way, not grade crossing, to capture events that occur near driveways or in parking lots or mid-block events. The right-of-way grade crossing option has been clarified, as mentioned earlier, to mean an intersection where a roadway and a transit exclusive right-of-way cross each other at the same level, or at grade. This will be most common in light rail or your hybrid rail modes. The first new option that we have is right-of-way intersection. This should now be used to capture collisions at an intersection or crossroads where street-running rail crosses in mixed traffic. This selection will be primarily for streetcar and cable car systems, though it could include some light rail systems. Both the grade crossing and the intersection locations include pedestrian crosswalks and exclude driveways and parking lot entrances. However, there may be many configurations out there and positions of crosswalks, so if you have any questions about the location, please contact your safety analyst. Second new selection is service stop, which is a location for passengers to board and or alight the transit vehicle, typically on street, at the curb, or in a median, sometimes with a shelter, sign, or lighting. Again, the revenue facility would actually be used for actual stations that have, as I mentioned, ticket machines, restrooms, stairs, elevators, so on and so forth. Okay, just for a visual reference, we've put up some examples here. Obviously, this is not going to cover every possible scenario in your grade crossings or your intersections, but these are typical expectations. The first 2 images are of a typical grade crossing. You'll notice that in the second image, the rail alignment is in the median and has curbs on both sides to separate it from the roadway vehicles. The intersection image shows street running operations where a streetcar is crossing over a roadway intersection. Then you see a typical revenue facility. And then finally, a typical service stop, which just has signage and a small shelter. For the collision with selection, indicate that what the train collided with, such as another vehicle, a person, an animal, a fixed object, whatever the case may be. A collision with a bicyclist, pedicab, or a person in a wheelchair is always reported as a collision with a person. Scooters, mopeds, and motorcycles, school buses, dump trucks are all reported as a collision with a non-transit motor vehicle. Only use the other selection on this form when no other selection presented is appropriate. A collision with a transit vehicle is used when 2 transit vehicles from your agency collide. Choose the appropriate collision collision with, depending upon if the train was in or not in service. A multiple impact collision scenario, report the collision with as the first object or vehicle that was impacted. For example, a train collides with a car, and then the car goes on to hit a building. The collision with selection would be non-transit motor vehicle, and you would include the damages to the building, and that the within your damage criteria, and the indicate that the building was struck in your event description. So let's look at a few examples on how many other vehicles to include in your report. As we showed you in the table earlier, when two non-revenue maintenance vehicles are involved in a collision, you do not include a transit revenue vehicle, but include two other vehicles instead to generate the other vehicle form. That was on that table that you could refer back to. If car 1 cuts off a light rail vehicle, but no contact is made, and the LRV goes on to hit car 2, the number of other vehicles to report would be 1, since only car 2 had contact. If car 1 hits car 2, and then car 2 goes on and hits the light rail vehicle, the number of other vehicles to report would be 2, since both car 1 and car 2 had contact with each other. Please note that this is not the total number is not the number of vehicles in the where it says number of other vehicles informed. This selection is not where you indicate it's a total number of vehicles. You don't want to, it's just with the office, see this in reports. This is only to include the number of other vehicles, not the train. You would not include that in the count. Okay, so after the collision event information screen is finished, the next screen to appear would be the collision information screen. Here you see a sample of that on the left-hand side, and then we've just kind of called out the service stops that you would see. This will change according to what you've chosen as your location. So if your location was intersection, you're going to see intersection control devices. If it was grade crossing, you're going to see the grade crossing control devices you see down here. And if you had chosen service stop, of course, you would see the service stop control device. All right, the collision information form also collects the weather conditions at the time. It also collects the lighting at the time of the collision, and twilight is used to refer to both dawn and dusk when it's not full light or not full dark yet. And please be sure that your lighting selection corroborates your time that you've typed in. Indoors, is not used to indicate street lights or lights on a station platform. The condition of the roadway is also collected, such as wet, dry, icy, so on. Under the rail alignment, we're going to look at two of these options. The first is shared with other rail vehicles, controlled access to other non-rail vehicles. You would use this selection when the rail alignment is a semi-exclusive right-of-way with controlled grade crossings for vehicular traffic. Second, we're going to take a look at is non-exclusive right-of-way shared with vehicles or pedestrians. This would be selected when the rail alignment consists of rail tracks that are embedded in the street and cars can drive over them or pedestrians can walk across them in the same area as the transit vehicles. Neither of these options would be selected if the mode is heavy rail, since heavy rail alignments would always be exclusive, with the exception of two agencies that we have that have grade crossings in their yards. All right, at this point, we've completed the collision information screen. So we're going to move on to the rail transit train involved screen, which would be the next screen that you would appear as you move through your collision report. The form does include identifying counts and buttons for increasing or decreasing the number of vehicles. This is a screenshot of the Rail Transit Train Involved screen. The form captures the information about the revenue vehicle. How many cars are included in the consist, if any cars derailed out of the consist, the vehicle action at the time of the collision, and the collision type, which is the part of the train that was impacted, the front, the rear, wherever, transit vehicle speed, and the if a runaway train was involved. So the fleet involved is the first thing that comes up on that transit train involved form, and the fleet involved form section, is linked to your transit agency's current or most recently saved A30 revenue vehicle inventory form. There are separate A30 forms for each mode and type of service. With this integration, you will choose the vehicle from a list of available options for that mode. When the selection is made, the vehicle manufacturer and the fuel type are already part of the selection, thus eliminating the need for making an incorrect selection there. If you're operating a new manufacturer that is not in your A30, you will have an option to add a vehicle to the form. However, adding a vehicle to the collision form does not update the A30 form itself. If you have questions about the A30 or don't see a manufacturer that you know that you have in your A30, you would want to contact the person in your agency that submits the A30 forms annually. All right, so when you're on that screen again, you have existing fleet and you have a new fleet button. The existing fleet is the link to the A30. And when you click on existing fleet, as you see has been selected here, it's going to come up with filters that you can use for your RVI ID, the agency fleet ID, a vehicle type, or specific manufacturer. And then those filtered results, if you use the filter, will show the results down at the bottom with all of the pertinent information. So then once you make your selection, you click on the checkbox according to the vehicle that you want, and then this Add Fleet button would become usable, and you would add that to your form, adding it to the collision report. Again, it's not adding it to the A30. If the vehicle is not listed in your A30 and you need to add a new vehicle, then you would have clicked on New Fleet, and when you click on that, it gives you a place where that you can choose from your drop-downs to indicate the vehicle type, the manufacturer, and the type of fuel that's used. And then again, once you've completed those through the drop-downs, you would click on Add Fleet to add it to the collision form. So after you've added it, and this is what it would look like on your screen. So it collapses the screen and it appears like this. If you need to make a correction, you realize you accidentally selected the wrong RVI ID or the wrong manufacturer, whatever the case may be, you can remove this by clicking on the red X to the right, and then you just start over with the existing fleet or Add Fleet option again. Okay, so then after that, the form wants to know the number of cars in the train and the number of cars that derailed, if any. It also collects the vehicle action at the time of the collision, stopped, turning, whatever the case may be, and the collision type. And the collision type is the part of the train that was hit and is reported from the viewpoint of the train. This diagram shows impact points that are reported, the various selections of impact points. One thing I'd like to point out here, we are going to mention a couple of other ones, but other front impact, remember, does not mean on the side. We'll see this often when they indicate that it was the left front quarter panel. Okay, well, that's the side and not the front. It's the Other front impact, front and rear literally mean the front of the vehicle or the rear of the vehicle. Let's go look at a couple of other ones that can be other front impact and other rear impact, again, are not the same as rear-ending or rear-ended. These are used when the front or rear of the transit vehicle is impacted, but not when it be considered a head-on or rear-ending, which would be more of a full-on impact, not just the corner. Rear-ended and rear-ending are always reported as a pair. So you would not want to combine rear-ending and other rear impact, for example. If the transit vehicle was rear-ended, then the other vehicle did a rear-ending. Multiple vehicle accidents or chain reaction accidents can be a challenge sometimes. Remember to consider the first impact or collision type in your analysis. So in this diagram, vehicle 1 would be reported as rear-ending. It's hitting the second vehicle, which means that vehicle 2 was rear-ended, which then caused it to be pushed into vehicle 3. So it is also reported as rear-ended because that's what happened first. And then that went on to hit vehicle 3, which would also be reported as rear-ended. So the first vehicle did the rear-ending and everything else was rear-ended. Okay, we also collect the speed at the time of the collision, the actual or estimated speed. And then the last question, again, involves did the collision involve a runaway train? And if you say yes on that selection, then it's going to ask you if the operator was in or out of the vehicle at the time. All right, so after the other vehicle involved form, after the transit vehicle involved form, if an other vehicle was involved, then you will see the other vehicle information form. Screen gathers information about the non-transit vehicle or vehicles that were involved. If one or more vehicle is involved in the collision, then you will need to complete one other vehicle information form for each motor vehicle involved. Vehicle counts are included on the form as well, in addition to selections for adding or removing vehicles. This is a screenshot of the other vehicle involved form. All right, the form also, similar to the transit vehicle, it collects the type of the other vehicle. When reporting a collision with on the other vehicle form, it does have a selection for commercial rail or Amtrak vehicles if one of those vehicles were to collide on your shared track with one of your vehicles. An automobile selection would be used for both cars and passenger vans, such as a Dodge Caravan. It also collects the action of that vehicle at the time, the physical action of that vehicle when the collision occurred. Again, the collision type is collected. Just as when you're reporting on the transit vehicle, it's from the viewpoint of the other vehicle. And you'll see the similar options for the impact points as you did on the transit vehicle. And then the last question on the form is the tow-away question. Was this vehicle towed due to disabling damage as a result of the collision? And again, you use that yes or no accordingly. Remember, if you've said yes here, then we're going to make sure that you've also selected substantial damage because that tow-away meets the substantial damage criteria. All right, so that's all of the vehicles. If you had an injury or fatality in your event, then you will see an injury and or fatality form for each injury or fatality involved in the event. Person type location categories are divided into two groups. You'll see persons outside the vehicle first. There's a longer list for outside of the vehicles, and then persons inside the vehicles. So be sure to choose carefully here. We often see reports of a train collision, and they tell us that the operator wasn't in the vehicle. Well, that could be, but then that's a runaway train event, and you would have had to make sure you check the runaway train option. But most likely, your operator was in the train at the time of the collision, so you'd want to choose the one from inside vehicles. Transit vehicle rider would be a correct choice for passengers boarding or alighting at the time. and for people that are train surfing or riding between the cars. Pedestrian walking along road also includes walking along tracks. Pedestrian other, excuse me, pardon me. Pedestrian other is the best choice for people that are sitting, standing, or laying on the tracks, for example. Only the injury form includes selections for the nature of the injury, serious or non-serious, and a checkbox to indicate if the person was transported. Remember that a seriously injured person may not have been transported from the scene. A non-serious injury does require transport. And again, please try and describe the nature of that serious injury in your event description. It also has checkboxes at the bottom of the injury and fatality form for attempted suicide, suicide, and trespasser. You can use all of these as needed. Just as with attempted suicides, if there are police reports, eyewitness statements, or other accounting for trespassing, please try and include that in the event description. Again, and using the words such as trespasser or trespassing in your event description is most helpful to us. As mentioned, our job is to read your reports and make sure that everything corroborates everything else. So check the trespassing box accordingly. We do not collect trespassing as an event type. I know we get that question fairly often. If you have a trespasser, it has to meet the reporting criteria and the threshold in order for that to be reportable, not just the fact that they were trespassing someplace. Okay, so this is a snapshot of the fatality form. And here you see the outside selections and then the inside selections, and then your suicide, in this case it's a suicide, and trespasser boxes down at the bottom. And this is the injury form, and here again you see this is where you choose the nature of the injury, serious or non-serious, and instead of a suicide box you have an attempted suicide box and the transported from the scene question. Okay, with that I'm going to let James do some talking, and we'll be covering the chat box. James?
Thank you, Ann. All righty, so we will now talk about some evacuations. Evacuations can be included in any event type, but are less common in collisions. If an evacuation is incorrectly included or excluded, you cannot add or delete it from a report. The entire report would need to be deleted and a new report entered with or without the evacuation. Evacuations are not when a person is removed from the vehicle for medical treatment or cut from the vehicle with jaws of life. A person hit by a car on a city street and lands on the rail right of way. Transferring passengers from one train to another where the passengers are not placed on the right of way. Here's a screenshot of the evacuation subform. The first question on the evacuation event screen is to confirm that the evacuation was for life safety to the rail right of way, and if either of these situations was a self-evacuation. You may select as many options as needed. They'll then include a brief description of the evacuation, including the cause. The "what was evacuated" question is used to indicate what was actually evacuated. One choice would be vehicle vessel, which would mean the train. Do not report the location of the train at the time. Once the evacuation subform is generated in a report, it cannot be deleted. So if an evacuation is incorrectly included, the entire report would need to be deleted and a new report entered without the evacuation. Similarly, you cannot add an evacuation subform to a report. Reporting derailments are automatically reportable, excluding Commuter Rail or Alaska Railway, as they report only security events. All derailments of transit trains on mainline track or in the yard are reported, even if the train is not in revenue service and regardless of any other major threshold. Again, derailments include situations where the rail leaves the track and then re-rails. Maintenance equipment such as a high rail vehicle, derailments are also automatically reportable. Please be sure to select one rail transit vehicle involved and not the other vehicle form. As a reminder, derailments resulting from a collision are reported as collisions, not a derailment. This is a screenshot of the derailment form. As you can see, the form collects the type of derailment, where the derailment occurred, the number of trains involved, and the location of the derailment and the right-of-way configuration. This is a screenshot of the derailment rail transit details, from which is much like the collision information screen, collecting lighting, alignment, and conditions. This is a screenshot of the derailment rail transit train involved form. Regarding the fleet selection, if this is a derailment of a high rail or other maintenance vehicle, choose new fleet, and for the vehicle type and manufacturer type, please use the other selection for the time being. However, soon you will see an option for rail maintenance vehicle. Notice the same integration of the A30 form, which is completed just as we discussed under the collision section. The form also collects information about the train involved, including if the derailment was due to a runaway train. Reporting fires on the SNS 40 that meet one or more major event threshold. To be defined as a fire, the incident must have had fire suppression equipment or personnel involved to contain the fire, and must meet a major event threshold. Without these thresholds, a fire requiring suppression is reported on the SNS 50 non-major summary report. Arson is reported on screen 1 as a system security event, not a fire. The presence of smoke only is reported as an other safety event. Here's a screenshot of the fire event details screen. If the fire is in or on the rail vehicle, including in the engine, wheel area, or anywhere on the outside, this would be reported as in or on vehicle. Report the type or cause of the fire. For the fuel type selection, if you choose the location of the fire as in or on vehicle, then you would report the fuel type of the vehicle. Acts of God are natural and unavoidable catastrophes that affect the transit environment. Select all locations of property damage, injuries, fatalities, and evacuations. You'll be able to choose more than one option. For example, the location should indicate the property or properties that were damaged and not the geographic location such as the name of the city. Here's a screenshot of the Act of God screen. When reporting hazardous material spills, the spill must meet a reportable threshold and have caused imminent danger to life, health, or environment, and required specialized cleanup. A couple of examples of what is not reportable as a hazmat event are listed below. Here's a screenshot of the hazardous material spill screen. Notice you report the location of the spill and the type of material spilled. There are two categories of security events on screen 1, system security or personal security events, which must meet one or more of the following thresholds. System security events occur on transit property and affect the transit system as a whole. Personal security events happen to individuals on transit property or those boarding or alighting a transit vehicle. This is the form used to report attempted suicide or suicide where the event does not involve contact with the train. This is a screenshot of the system security event screen. You may notice that there is an other system security event option on this form. This would be to capture security events that do not meet any other category. For example, shots fired at or objects thrown at the vehicle that have a threshold. This is a screenshot of the personal security event screen. You will notice that there is an other personal security event option for events that do not fit into other categories, such as when a person is transported due to being tased by the police. The final major event type is other safety events. This is your miscellaneous category. These events must meet one of the following thresholds: 1 or more fatalities, 2 or more injured, either serious or non-serious, substantial damage, an evacuation, or involved a runaway train. Please note, you may report an other safety event with 1 injury if another threshold is met. Here are some examples: an evacuation of transit property due to smoke, fumes, or noxious odors. Any fatality on transit property that is not considered a collision or suicide, such as a fall or electrocution. 2 people thrown from their seats due to a hard brake and transported. 3 people injured when an escalator comes to an abrupt stop. Other safety events resulting in only a single injury are reported on the SNS 50 monthly summary form. This is a screenshot of the other safety event screen. So at this point, we have completed all of our screens for the reportable event types. So we'll now review saving, submitting, and editing. At any point from the basic information screen on, the system automatically saves your report. So if you close the report without saving or submitting from this point on, these auto-saved reports become pending reports, which are stored as a task on the task menu option. When you are ready to complete the report, click on the task menu option and you will see a listing of each task. Major event report tasks will appear with the SNS 40 in the title. Just click on the task and the system will return you to the screen you were on when you close the report. Complete the report and save and submit. Or if you no longer need the report, you can choose to delete instead. Save and submit options appear when you are in the view form mode. If you do not see a save or submit button, click on the view form button and scroll to the bottom. Once you click on save, the report is saved and it is given an event number at the top of the report. The report will then stay open so you may review it. When you submit a report, the report will close and the report will be returned and will return you to the dashboard. Submitting the report releases the report to the validation analyst for review and comment. It also notifies the analyst that a report has been created or edited. Please note that unsubmitted reports are excluded from the event, injury, and fatality counts in the SNS 20 CEO certification form. Analysts may return any report to you for questions or to make corrections. The system will send the last modified user 1 email for each report that is returned. After you make a correction, please be sure to save and submit. The comment box is included at the bottom of the respective form, except the SNS 20 CEO certification. This box is used by safety analysts to ask for clarification or a change request. Each time the form is returned, it is timestamped. Users may also respond to a request using the comment box. However, you do not need to comment that you made the change, as we will see that in the form. If the analyst asks you to add a statement to the event description, please enter that statement in the event description and not the comment box. When reviewing or editing your reports, it is important to learn how to move around the document. Here's a list of the available button tools, though each button may not be available on every form. One shortcut I would like to point out is the Jump To section button. This button allows you to jump to a specific screen instead of using the next or back buttons. You'll also need to click on this Jump To button if a report has been returned and a change needs to be made. This concludes the presentation. If you did not get a chance to ask your question or prefer to ask it in a one-on-one session, please feel free to contact any of us.
Well, everyone, I think you're still there.
Hello?
Alondria, usually, there she is.
Yes, I'm here. So there are no further questions. Just wanted to give people an opportunity. Okay, great. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending and participating today. Very special thank you to our presenters, Ann Singleton and James Overbeek, for their very informative presentation, and to Ann Eichelberger for assisting with the Q&A box. Just a reminder, you'll be receiving an invitation to fill out an evaluation for this event. NTI greatly appreciates your feedback. Thank you so much. Be well, be safe, and have a great weekend. Take care, everybody.
Bye, everyone.